Hello, world. Welcome to Tea and Politics with Maya. I'm Maya, and today we're again together for another episode of a weekly podcast, which is actually not being very regular in being a weekly thing, but still, I'm trying my best. Again, we have an episode dedicated on power, empowerment, leadership, and today with us we have a truth, authentic community leader. And I'm very glad that I want this to be a human episode, not that much politics episode, because I think that sometimes we are lost in talking about politics so much that we forget that the recipients, on the other hand, are actually people. So, having said all that, welcome, Lyza. It's nice
Thank
to
you.
see you. It's nice to meet you after a while. We haven't seen each other after a while. Lyza is currently a project officer in one of the biggest EU umbrella organizations. She's Ukrainian. And how we ended up here, more or less, is in February, there will be the second anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. And I thought that it would be interesting to have somebody walk us through their own experience of what it feels like to have a war happen to your country, but not the political, like not the sanctions, not about Putin, not about what it means for the accession of Ukraine to the EU and all of those things that we're kind of used to talking about, but also not the very the sad story of somebody fleeing with a backpack, but an actual like reflection of what it means in the 21st century if somebody just decides that where you live you shouldn't live anymore and somebody else would come, and how that affects your life, your education, your marriage, your personal life. I don't know, your having a dog, everything that happens to a person in their 20s and 30s. So without any further ado, welcome, Lyza.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you, Maya, for inviting me. I will be glad to share my thoughts and anything I hope that could be interesting for others to hear. And it is my pleasure to be here with you today.
I'm sure you have a lot to say. Let's start from, this is always my favorite questions, because in Brussels people, they come from different places for different reasons, with different hats, with different motivation. So, how the hell did you end up in Brussels? What did you do to deserve this? How did it happen that you're in a place that you are right now, being a project officer? You have extensive experience with UNICEF, with different international organizations, but how come Lyza is where she is now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, I think there are at least two sides of the story. How I ended up here. One is personal, another one is professional. And first of all, I have never been planning to live in Brussels and generally to move out from Ukraine. But we will skip one part that I'll come back to in a while. 10 days before the full-scale invasion, I arrived here because I was afraid that something is going to happen. And I happened to have a person to whom I could arrive here. And this was one of the hardest decisions in my life because, the suspicions that something is going to happen were lasting for months. And there were different camps of people who were deniers and who believed that, no, it can happen, both in Ukraine and abroad. And I was one of those who believed that it could indeed happen. And I think to a greatest extent, it's because I come from Donetsk and my home was already invaded once, and I had to flee my home in 2014. So back then I also didn't expect it. And it seemed something extraterrestrial, like it's not going to happen. What are you talking about? But it did. So I was willing to believe that it can happen as well. Also, of course, considering all the political factors. So yeah, why it was one of the most difficult decisions, because I worked, I had my dream job. I had a lot of plans. I remember for the next week, like I had meeting every day, something was happening. But there was this piece of information from American intelligence that Russia will invade on the 14th or 13th of February. I don't remember now. So I decided and I took the tickets from one day to another, and I left. And the reason why, the most important reason, I also didn't want to leave my family behind, but I thought that if the full-scale invasion happens and I am in Ukraine, I am a part of the problem. And
you're involved anyway
exactly
there.
yes.
Yeah.
And if I'm somewhere outside, I can be a part of the solution of the problem, for example, taking my family out or whatever things that actually have been done later on the border with humanitarian aid and everything. So that's the personal side of Brussels. Please tell me if it's too long.
No, it's not. It's not long at all. So you said that you're from Donetsk, and then in 2014, because I think that's also very important. There have been two misconceptions, I would say, when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine that happened 2 years ago, and that it's that the war actually didn't start 2 years ago.
No.
The other misconception, which I must say that as somebody from the Balkans also feels really weird for me to hear it, that before 2 years ago, there were no wars in Europe for so many years. And I think that for everyone who even knows what Yugoslavia is and remembers the 90s, which I'm sorry, I'm not that old, it's not that long time ago, there were wars. And they were really, really bloody, horrible wars where NATO was also involved. So I'm not sure how come this myth was created that the war started 2 years ago. It didn't. So can you walk us through how, so 2014 you left Donetsk, more or less for the same reason that you...
Exactly, for the same.
Okay.
Yeah. So as I said, back then, to me, I was still a student. It was something out of the blue. I was a student of international relations, so exactly like learning about international law, about UN, about NATO, and everything like that. And then first thing that happened in Ukraine was Euromaidan, and it was an awakening for me, probably as for a young person of my Ukrainian identity. I've always identified myself as Ukrainian. So this is one of the myths that I'm trying to always break to people, that it's a myth that people in Donetsk, in Luhansk wanted Russia there. I didn't, and I was surrounded by people who also didn't. Of course, maybe there were some, 0.01% who wanted that, but overall, that was not the case. And so Euromaidan, which was eventually a good thing for our country because we got rid of a bad government, and then we started our way towards Europe, towards reform, towards civilized world. But then, of course, Crimea, an invasion of Donetsk and Luhansk, and I remember. Trying to look at it, to analyze it as a student, because not slowly, but this was a machine that was, I'm sure the preparation for this happened for a long time, because, for example, our TV channels, we had Ukrainian TV channels, normal, and then all of a sudden, some of them were cut off and replaced with Russian channels.
Which doesn't happen overnight. It needs preparation, even technical,
Yeah. And I was super curious. I remember, now we had this course of international information, so we learned about media a lot. And I was turning on these TV channels just to see what they have to say. And it was complete, just information upside down.
Yeah.
First about I'm talking now still about Maidan time. So it started, it was autumn, and the so-called referendum on Donetsk being independent happened on the 11th of May. So the time frame was huge. And I left the city during the day of the so-called referendum, because it was not safe. By then, already there were so many people on the streets with weapons. There were some explosions.
And generally, referendums organized in authoritarian, I mean, you know that it's supposed to be a democratic tool, but sometimes referendums are just meant to be shown for the outsiders. You know the outcome.
But not only that, it was illegal. We don't have a law in Ukraine of local referendums. It can only be on the national grant. So it was illegal. And also, like, human story side of these referendums, my friends went to vote against, and they were coming to those cabins together with guys with military. So they were not alone. They were with the people with the guns. Like, it's so we left the city just for our own security because we didn't know what would happen, specifically on referendum. And then the situation happens to me for the second time. I left to Kiev for an internship, to do an internship by the end of June. And I never came back home because in this period while I had internship, anti-terrorist operation by Ukrainian government was launched in Donetsk. And then it was simply unsafe for me to come home, also because there were these military points established by separatists who were monitoring your social media, looking at your history, whatever. Like, again, I have a lot of friends and people who were put in cellars, to be interrogated and stuff like that. So it wasn't safe for me to go back home after that.
All of that sounds to me like something people still don't understand that it's happening in Europe and that it's so close, even to Belgium. I mean, it's... on the other hand, I remember when 2 years ago in February, the invasion happened, there were a lot of meetings, international meetings on European level for civil society. And all the time I had this really interesting feeling. It was not a fact, it was a feeling that when we talk about Ukraine, a lot of people who are based in Brussels and talk about European policy don't understand the context, don't understand what you just said, what you just described in a very factual manner. Look, guys, this is what happened. And it was, I think there was enough publicity even for 2014 about Crimea, about Donetsk, but yet people were somehow unaware of it. And my question to you is, now, for you being in here, how do you see Ukraine? How do you see Ukraine from Brussels? How do you see Donetsk from Brussels? Do you see, I don't know, do you see it differently? Do you think that this distance between Belgium and Ukraine is more than, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 kilometers? To me, it seems like it's decades of difference and of understanding.
Honestly, it seems much closer than I thought it would seem. Like, from Ukraine, you think, oh my, I don't know, west of Europe, so far away. It's much closer in many senses. One of them is that, unfortunately, even after 2014, we are in war with Russia, right? We were invaded by Russia, and unfortunately, even in Ukraine, I'm not even talking about international community that imposed sanctions that were already overcame many times. I think probably all of them are irrelevant because they found their ways out and lots of other things back in 2014, 15. And even in Ukraine, people kind of moved on and it was on the background. Not so many people were thinking about it. They were still
the life went on.
Yeah, and also our relationships with Russia were still very close. There were close ties economically and business-wise, culture-wise. I don't know, artists going here and there with some exceptions, like I don't know if there is one artist going from Ukraine going to Crimea. It was unaccepted by society, but still, it went on the background for many people, and here, in Brussels, of course, it went for background for everyone. Everyone forgot about it, and I my personal perception was that it would probably be be one of these frozen conflicts, that last for ages. So in this regard, it's not that far. And also, when you think about it, the problems people have here are the same. Prices are growing. Everyone is complaining on the government where to put your kids in the kindergarten. Like day-to-day problems here are the same. So
the difference is just Russia is not invading Belgium.
Yes,
it's a slight difference.
Yeah.
Now listening to you, I was thinking of something that it's very strange to say and to have a reality, actually, not to say, but it's very strange to have a reality where a bigger country can just come, take part of what is considered somebody else's territory, but then life just goes on. And I've been digging about that, like the Slavic understanding of brotherhood, where Russia is this big brother, but in a good way, because I know that in English, when you say big brother, it has a bit of a different meaning. But bratski in the Slavic languages is more like a supporter, somebody who will protect you, something like that. And in Bulgaria, where I'm from, there's been so many of this Russian propaganda, but also a lot of people who genuinely say, no, Russia is they're just trying to protect, they're just trying. It's weird, but I think that we have still this wound, this trauma of how the Soviet Union is just something that was generally universally good, and that whatever happens afterwards needs to be respected and accepted. And I think that, for example, if, I don't know, United States would invade Ukraine and take part of it, I would say that maybe there would be a different response. And people would be like, no, you cannot do that. And so I think that there is a very weird heritage that a lot of Eastern Europe has towards the Soviet Union, which, in my opinion, Russia and the Soviet Union should not be, it's not equal. For sure, it's not equal. But there is this imperialistic approach that if I'm bigger and I want to take something, I will take it and you will accept it. And I think that's very scary.
No, of course. There's so many things that you said that I want to kind of develop on. But maybe one of them would be that, if I may, I would disagree that Soviet Union is something like a good thing. I think for Ukraine...
No, I was being sarcastic. I absolutely don't. No. I don't believe, but I think that there are still many people that
believe so.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It wasn't. It was, and this propaganda of brotherhood has been, it lasts for decades now, if not more. And that's the problem. That's maybe the root of the problem, that they're claiming to save people. Save from what? I'm sorry. They destroyed all these cities that inhabited hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. How is this saving? How is this protecting?
Nobody needed saving before they arrived, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And on top of that, this so-called brotherhood was artificially imposed. Russia saying that it created Ukraine is ridiculous, because there was Kiev and Rus with a capital in Kiev, not in Moscow. Moscow was created long time after that. And on top of that, with Ukrainian language that they again claim is, it was created from Russian language. It wasn't, and it was people who spoke Ukrainian in the territories of my hometown in Donetsk, in Luhansk. Our grandmothers and grandfathers, most of them spoke Surzik. Surzik is a combination of Russian and Ukrainian. Why? Because they were taught from Ukrainian to speak Russian, many of them. So it was imposed. Russian language, Russian culture, Russian way of thinking, that Russia is a big, powerful country, and Russians are sacrificing, everything for their motherhood, this everything. I felt this propaganda also on me, but luckily I was born in Ukraine, first of all. And I suppose also I was surrounded by smart people who were also giving me some healthy ideas into my head
And you
when
will
I was
learn
a
to
child.
question. You will learn to question things.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, my first experience with actually questioning if what I'm learning and what I know is propaganda regarding to Russia, and I mean, because we have to be very honest, everyone who's been raised in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s through the educational system of Eastern Europe, I would say question your history textbooks a lot. So, and to me, there is this myth in Bulgarian history that whatever happened to us happened, but then the liberators came and Russia freed us, and then everything that has been going on during the communistic regime of Bulgaria was the best times that we would ever have. And now,
Okay.
So, and the thing is that, for example, in high school, I didn't learn a lot about communism at all. Like that, this was, for example, a crime regime. I didn't know that until later on, like my late teens, when I started to just read outside of the recommended books and just to read about communistic regimes outside of Bulgaria, I realized that this was actually not too legal, and that what stories I have heard as like urban myths and things like that, that were crimes. And we still have a lot of problems that the history books of our generations are shaped by Russia in a way, and that we learn things which shape our mindset, and that we need to be really challenging ourselves in order to think differently, which is very strange because not everyone has that privilege to have the good education, to travel, to challenge. I mean, a lot of people just go to school, they learn what they're taught, and then this is what you end up with. This is the mind that you have.
Exactly. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And on top of that, there are also different generations. My mom was born in the Soviet Union, so she had, all of her textbooks were not Ukrainian; they were Soviet, and I don't know, the conversations about pioneer. I don't know.
Pioneers,
everything, and even all the phrases, we have still, and we try to eradicate them from our dictionary, from Russian movies. Something like things connected with pioneers, this children's movement of communism, and everything. It's so enshrined because of history, of course, and also you were saying about, you were talking about reading books, like school books, but even if you wanted to learn something more, the sources were available in Russian language.
Yeah.
At least for us, for Ukrainians, I learned a lot of things in Russian because my English back then was not that great, and you wanted or not wanted, this information is biased. And also, just to add up on the previous point that I was making, World War II in Russia is called Great Patriotic War.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's called Great Patriotic War, and it's also, many people use it as, in Russian it's used as synonyms. And in Ukraine, some people automatically, older people could still say that. And, you need to correct because it's not.
That's, I think, part of the heritage of the regimes that Eastern Europe had for so many years, that this narrative, it's so deeply enrooted in the school system, in the political system, in the economic system, into everything, that you just need generations of re-education, of calmly communicating and explaining yourself, which sometimes it's so damn difficult. Because I have friends who are not even that, when I'm talking about generations, yes, my mom and my dad were also raised during, not officially Soviet Union, because Bulgaria was never officially part of it, but it was very much part of it. And our government actually volunteered to be part of it, which is so, Jesus Christ. But then, whatever happens to international independence, What I meant to say is that even my mom, who is a doctor, for example, had to do an exam on communistic culture. So everyone who graduated during this time had to learn, had to commit, had to show dedication to something which is so wrong when it comes to human freedoms. And unfortunately, we still have that, because that was not so long time ago. And I think that also affects a lot how the way people are perceiving information now, how people are choosing sides now, and how people are deciding if they want to believe what they see on TV or not.
Yeah.
Because if they've been told for so many years, well, Russia is good, eventually when you see that on TV, you're like, yeah, they're fine. So we should accept.
You know,
Yeah.
it made me realize one thing, that Russia is so this whole thing is propaganda that they're so great, that you know, they have so patriotic people that want to defend their country, and everything. It's honestly like North Korea has a bad image
Good,
in
smooth transition.
So North Korea has a very bad image internationally normally,
Yeah.
and it's as if they had better PR. They could have just like that be like, North Korea is amazing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
it's great. Everyone is I don't know, healthy there and smiley, and it's just if they had better PR. The same thing about Russia. It's not amazing, but yet even people of my generation from Western Europe still, unfortunately, believe that Russia is amazing. I've met people like that, and it's.
I'm thinking of a working title for this episode, like North Korea's PR suck, but they're good at bombs, like things like that. So, okay, look, let's leave the past and try to see what we can do with the future, because I think that also part of the very interesting conversation that happens within the EU bubble about Ukraine now is that Ukraine is becoming an actor when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to future membership of the EU in a new way. And I think that's good. I mean, of course, it's ridiculous that it took an invasion for Ukraine and also in a way for Moldova to be part of those conversations in a new way. But I think that it's interesting to see now how, if we put it like that, so the EU wants Ukraine in, Ukraine wants to be in the EU, but there needs to be a very complicated process of joining while Ukraine is being in defense mode, while they're trying to figure out a way what to do to not be occupied, how, because that's also very expensive, how to combine this with reforms, which are also very expensive. And in the same time, the EU to see how to do that without sacrificing all of those fundamental values of the EU, like the rule of law, anti-corruption, and all of that. And I think that's very complicated. So what are your thoughts on that? Is it possible to do reforms during war? Is it? I mean, it's a very big question, but like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the answer to big question is yes.
It is next. Yes.
It is possible to make reforms during the war, and moreover, it is very important to continue despite the war with the reforms. And I would like to tell you that since 2014. Since Ukraine was already invaded, there has been so many reforms. They were triggered by the association agreement that Ukraine signed with the EU, mostly, and those reforms were unprecedented for Ukraine. They touched, they didn't touch, they completely changed the, decentralization reform in Ukraine, anti-corruption reform with basically establishing an anti-corruption system, a lot of reforms also in the economic sector, for businesses, for banks, and other reforms were introduced since 2014. And as we all know, reformation is a long and very difficult process. And in this regard, Ukraine has done amazingly, because in a relatively short time, a lot of legislation base was built and even started being implemented. Of course, with falling, standing up again, but it's a normal process. And now, after the full-scale invasion, a reformation process continues, and I have a feeling that political elite and especially civil society understand that it needs to continue despite the war. We will. It is vital for the survival of the country, for it to continue to develop after Ukraine wins, but also now to attract investment, to attract foreign aid, it is important to continue this reform. So it is only positive, and it has to be done now and all the time.
Okay, well, if we can maybe go a bit into the specifics of what your background is and what my background is as topics, and see how the reforms are going there, because the EU generally started as an economic union, but it's more of a political union since 15, 20 years. And it's these policies which unite us as a union. Part of them go in the direction of human rights and equality, fair society. And so you work with UNICEF, you work with other international organizations. And I'm interested for you to tell me more about the reforms when it comes to disability, inclusion, and children. Because to me, these are, again, I don't want to sound too bad when I describe the past of Eastern Europe, but there is a certain understanding in the East, which I've been battling for all my professional career when it comes to disability. Disability needs to be hidden. And this is something that not a lot of people truly understand. I know it's a very general statement, but I think that for a lot of people, it's still kind of normal that if you have a disability, there is a stigma, there is a shame. And that, of course, leads to very different policies than we have in Central or Western Europe or the States or Scandinavia. So can you just give me like state of play? How are things now, and what has been changing?
So this is yet another beautiful legacy of the Soviet Union of hiding persons with disabilities and pretending that they're not there. Indeed, in Ukraine, when it comes to stigma, when it comes to societal perception, it's not great. To say it mildly, because it's becoming more normalized to see people with disabilities outside because of the war, because a lot of people are now being wounded and losing their limbs and other things. But it has always been very stigmatized. And the latest numbers that I saw, I don't know if it's some new survey, but even if it was 10 years ago, I don't know. I don't think that it changed drastically. Was that like 98% of people believe that people with disabilities should have the same rights as everyone else. But only less than 20% believed that wanted to be integrated with persons with disabilities, like children, studying together in school, being together in a workplace, entertainment, etc. And this is horrible. And it's very difficult for me to comprehend how it is possible. And I think that it will be a lot of work to change this mentality. But luckily, it started to change. Also, from recent data, almost every fifth person in Ukraine now has a disability. And people mentality needs to change. And I see more and more people in social media talking about it, posting their thoughts that we need to change, we need to be more tolerant, we need to be, inclusive. Yeah. And the best thing of all of that is that in 2021, our government finally took a turn and they accepted, I don't remember the name, but non-barrier strategy or something like that, about overall inclusion of persons with disabilities in all spheres of life. And it is a very comprehensive document, and it goes into a lot of other comprehensive documents and strategies. Unfortunately, it was created right before the full-scale invasion. So, of course, there was a step back after it. Now of all times, government talks about it, and government acknowledges all the problems that there are, and they're ready to work with them. At least that's the feeling that I get.
I think that when it comes to inclusion generally, but in particular disability, we can see, at least in my experience, this is the very clear way to see the link between a person and policymaking. And I really, what I mean is the following. If you as a politician don't understand why disability should not be a barrier, but is something that needs to be approached by a policymaker's perspective and not just, well, there is an elevator, this is my inclusion policy towards you. I think that it's a very long process. I'll try to say it in a clearer way. If you have a mentality as a political party or as a government that disability is not a barrier, you start creating policies, law, legal frames, programs, funding opportunity, environment for civil society, all of those in complex, which actually remove the barriers in society. Because I think that with the legacy that, as you said, we have from the Soviet times, disability was not a subject of anything apart from creating institutions, buildings where you can leave your child if they cannot walk or if they cannot talk. It didn't matter. And as a parent, I've spoken to so many parents that they say, well, we were convinced that this was a better thing. Because you cannot take care of a child with a disability because this is a very long-term care process. So if you need to go to work, you cannot leave the child alone. And then there is the state, which just says, well, leave it with us and we'll take care of it. And this happened in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, everywhere in the world. But eventually people in certain places of the world said, guys, this is a very bad idea. We have the data that this is damaging for the human life. This is not a good idea. In many levels, it doesn't create the outcome that we want. It's horribly damaging. And these institutions were closed. Yet in Eastern Europe, that didn't happen in time. And I want to go maybe transition a bit to what you're doing now and this project that we worked together for a while. When the war started, when the invasion happened 2 years ago, there was a huge missing piece of the media information about the war. And this was regarding people with disabilities and people in institutions in Ukraine. And there were large numbers of those both groups. And it was very difficult to work on that topic because, of course, every war, refugees, humanitarian crisis, it's horrible. But to hear some of the testimonials that we heard from people there, how they cannot leave, how even if somebody hears the airstrike alarm, they cannot leave because there's no any way.
Or they don't hear it.
Or you don't hear it at all. Or you can just, even if you hear it, you cannot leave. So all of those things were very difficult to hear. But I think it was important for us to platform those things so they can be heard. And after a while, we managed to create the SPD and UNICEF a very nice cooperation. And you took over, thanks God, after a couple of months for us struggling. And it's a great project, which I think is coming to an end now. So can you walk us through what happened in that initiative and what kind of challenges you fought yourself?
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, but it's such an interesting thing. And it's I think that everyone who is listening will have the curiosity to see the different parts of this project because it's like it's international cooperation, it's a lot of expert work, it's very grassroots, it's policy making. So it's
Yeah, it was. First of all, you're right. It is coming to an end, so now we can draw some conclusions. And what the project was about is there are three main things, which I think are complementing each other very well. And even though the project lasted only for 1 year and a half, this combination of three streams allowed to have some long-term effect, and also some, like, I cannot even call it closed because there is legacy and things continue happening even if we don't write emails to each other every day about this project. Always miswriting emails. So in any case, the project parts, as I said, there were 3 parts. The first of them was direct support to people that fled Ukraine and that have small children with disabilities, developmental delays, or that are at risk of developing such developmental delays. And I should say that probably every child that is under 7 years old was and still is at risk of developing developmental delays because of this immense stress of the war, of leaving all your friends, moving to another country with the language that you don't know, etc. This support took place in 5 neighboring countries of Ukraine: Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, and Slovakia. So huge scale. And initially we were aiming to support 12,000 people, children and their parents or whoever they came with. But in the end, we were able to reach more than 20,000 people. And I think this is a truly remarkable achievement. And it is thanks to our partners that we had in those 5 countries.
Numbers.
Yes. And I mean, I cannot even imagine, like put it in scale, how many people we were able to touch with this project. And just recently we were able to prepare some testimonials. And, the one that for me was, it's short but very vocal. I think it was a family consultant that wrote, this project changed my life. And
wow.
When if even one person wrote it, it was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot to mention that how this help happened. It happened through family consultants and peer support facilitators that we trained on the basics of early childhood intervention, early childhood development. And for peer supporters, we trained them on peer support. Most of them were Ukrainians also who themselves moved to these countries. And they provided support in terms of early childhood intervention and development in those countries, starting from some basic things. Where do I go to submit the documents for the disability certificate to be recognized, to, of course, psychological support. This was, we were told that every session was included psychological support. You cannot go without it. And peer support groups that were also very helpful for mothers, fathers to share their concerns and hear that they're not alone, that also there are ways to think for things to get better. And this was importantly complemented by 2 other streams of the project, one of which was national capacity building in those 5 countries that I mentioned. Our partners in those countries conducted research of the state of play of early childhood intervention generally in the country, but specifically how it was possible to,
as a response.
Yes, for the refugee crisis, and drafted the main challenges, which of course most of them are very similar in many countries, although there are some challenges that are completely different and very specific to some specific countries, and drew up recommendations for their national governments of how this can be improved. And last but not least, the third part of the project is advocacy, which was on the national level and on the EU level, to change what we have now for better, to improve. Basically, honestly, it's not even to improve early childhood intervention; it's to place it in the international agenda. To be honest with you, because I don't think people are talking about it yet. There is a lot of conversation about this deinstitutionalization that you mentioned before, that it is important and it needs to happen, and it's widely acknowledged fact and everyone is moving towards it. But early childhood intervention is not yet that widespread.
And it goes hand by hand with
Exactly.
DI. You cannot have, because on the other hand, if nobody supports the parents,
Yes.
okay, you will close the orphanages, but what then? You need to support the communities, the families. Yeah, it's very impressive. It's very impressive. There's always one fact that comes to me when I hear ECI in Ukraine. And I think, I'm not sure if I have mentioned it in no, I don't think I've mentioned it. So there was one of my most important conversations in my life ever, as a parent, as a person, as whatever, as a professional, was with a professor who was explaining the importance of ECI and the importance of the early childhood development as a general. This idea that it's not an idea, this fact that there are certain important times when a child's brain is developed, and that if something is not going right, the first 3 years are the time to intervene, the earlier the better, and vice versa. If something goes wrong in those early years, it's something that goes on for life. And also, apart from that, was a lecture that I really like. This Hungarian is from Hungarian origin, but I think lives in Canada. Gabor Mate, he speaks a lot about trauma that is experienced during these first years and how it affects physiologically in any other way of life. And when everything was happening, I remember that I read an article that in Poland, for the first, I think, few weeks, there were over 1 million of children from Ukraine to Poland. And I was just thinking that this is 1 million future citizens of Europe that are having such a severe experience in their childhood that there is no way this will not shape how they are in the future. And to me, this was just it's such a large scale trauma. And I think that Europe really, first of all, needed to have a better response, apart from the sanctions, apart from anything else. But on this humanitarian level, there were missing things. And I think that this project, for these 20,000 families that you've supported, it's remarkable and it's impressive. So, yeah.
Thank you. And of course, thanks go to all those people who
did it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a heavy topic, because I every time when I just think about it, I just really imagine like 1 million people who need to be supported now because of bad decision making on behalf of Putin. And that's like,
That's a very diplomatic way to put it. Bad decision making.
It's a bad way to put it. Okay, just forgot about that. Well, let's go back to Brussels. So I'm interested for you to tell me, as a Ukrainian, what do you think that people who are in here in the EU bubble misunderstanding about Ukraine? So I have my observations, but I want to see how you see it. Do you think, okay, let's start from that. Do you think that there's something that is left unclear when it comes to Ukraine for people who are based in here, in the EU bubble?
You mean on the political level, or?
Well, generally, when it comes to what's happening in the last few years in Ukraine, and there's a lot of people who are now involved in different activities with Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, reforming Ukraine, recovering Ukraine. And do you think that there is a clear understanding of Ukraine as a state, as a situation?
Very interesting question. I don't know if there is a clear understanding, but there is certainly, I think it changed definitely with the full-scale invasion, that it probably seemed to a lot of Europeans that Ukraine is undecided. Ukraine, wants to join the EU, but at the same time, it's fine. Yeah, it's it is not committed maybe to change, to introduce the changes that we need to change, concerning corruption and other problems that we have in the country. But I think this understanding of Ukraine really changed within the last 2 years, that Ukraine really wants to join the European family, and that Ukrainians are very determined, not only in their wish to join the EU and NATO, but also in fighting and, trying to prove what is true to them. And And to me personally, I think that the world for the first time heard about Ukraine as Ukraine as not former part of the Soviet
Yeah.
Union, but as a state that has its own identity, long history, and also big aspirations.
Mm-hmm. I remember now I had a friend who is from Moldova, and she said that thanks to what happened, people in the West finally discovered where Moldova is. And I was just thinking that somehow, I think Ukraine is huge. It's like
Yeah.
really, like when it comes to territory, population, it's huge. But I think that a lot of people discovered that you guys are there
Yeah.
where you are now. So yeah, well, I hope that it's what I mean in this question is that I got the impression in many of the meetings that there, first of all, there is lack of representation from Eastern European leaders. And I'm not talking about when Zelensky comes and he has a speech. I'm talking about like everyday operational meetings about Eastern Europe without people from Eastern Europe being on the table. And I've seen that, for example, when Bulgaria and Romania were joining, like a lot of, like long time ago, 15 years, I don't know, 2007, I think, or 2009, really long time ago. I was thinking that in the same way, there were people from our region missing when we were talking about Europe. And you cannot talk about Europe only having people from like the Nordics and Central Europe. You need an actual representation of Europe when you decide about Europe. So do you see this representation now being a bit more developed with the recent times?
That's difficult for me to answer because I mean I am present at some meetings, and well, yeah, I guess you are right that very often if a meeting or that I'm visiting is not specifically about Ukraine, then very often I'm the only one there from Ukraine to listen in, to pose some questions. But when it comes, to some meetings behind the closed doors, honestly, I don't know, or something that just is not public. This is why it's difficult for me to answer. On the other hand, I've heard many times, this phrase, nothing about us without us.
Yeah, that's the Disability World slogan. Yeah.
And also Ukraine says
Yeah.
about Ukraine, it uses this slogan, and it is there for a reason.
It is.
Because even when there are discussions, about rebuilding Ukraine, about lots of other things, yes, I think very often people are not invited or not informed that, and they need to contribute.
Yeah. I'm starting to be more and more focused on representation in the last couple of years when it comes, for example, to women being part of the conversation, minorities, whatever civil group that needs to be represented and it's not represented is creating a gap in the policy making that is discussed. So if you're talking about Europe, but you're missing a whole region with really a lot of people, and you're creating a European policy for the whole Europe, that's not going to work for everyone. Because
Exactly.
in the beginning, in the origin of the political process, you already had a gap. So yeah, I hope that we see more and more leaders, more and more activists, more community leaders such as yourself in good positions of power where you can change things and you can shape processes. So I have I have three questions which are always the last ones, like we wrap up with them, about happiness and hopefulness and things like that. But I have last question regarding Ukraine. What do you want to do? What would be the first thing that you do when Ukraine is free? What would you do back in Ukraine? What would you like? Is there a favorite ice cream that you have? Like what would that be for you?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is I would go and hug my family and join the whole nation in this. I think I will cry a lot from happiness, but also understanding how many people and things were lost due to this war. But probably the next day, I will start planning my work on rebuilding back better, because that's what I really want for Ukraine. after going through so much pain and through so much hardships to get what it deserves. Just a good life. And I know also that this is an opportunity for us to, as I said, build back better now, with including persons with disabilities, including women, including people of different nationalities, including civil society, businesses, everyone into decision-making process, and creating a better future for my future children.
Yeah, it's a nice first thing to do. Yeah, I hope you get to do all of that soon, and you enjoy a life in your environment, because I think, I mean, of course Belgium is nice and there are many things that are better here in a way than in Bulgaria and Ukraine, but it's not home, and it's not your place when it comes to belong. I mean, not your, but like it's a different place of belonging. And I hope that you managed to do all of that. What I meant with the ice cream, and of course, it's a very dumb question to ask, like, would you have ice cream if your country is free? But it's
I will, if anything.
I mentioned to you during our pre-conversation that I found this poet, a Ukrainian poet who unfortunately lost his life in the war. And I heard of him and of his poetry and of his, he's such a great poet, in a Bulgarian show where they invited his translator in Bulgarian to read some of his poems. And there was something, it was such a strong poem, but I don't have it in English. So I will just list it when the episode is here in Ukrainian and in Bulgarian. But in it, that was one of his last poems. It was said that I want to go back to the street that I used to walk. I want to hear all of the city noise that I used to know, and I want to have all the smells and the coffees. And I was just thinking, this must have been so difficult for him, like this gentle soul of somebody who likes to walk and have coffee and listen to city sounds, to be somewhere where war is. And I think that this perspective of poets, of artists, of people like yourself, of not politicians, but people who are involved in community building, it's a very important perspective. So I'm very thankful that you're sharing it, and I hope that a lot of people can hear what you're saying without the filters of what they know before, if they were born in the Soviet Union, if they like Putin or they don't like. There is a community perspective, which is very important because a community is damaged. Like a whole huge part of the European community is damaged because of what's happening. So I will share that poem.
Thank you.
And I hope your message reaches whoever it needs to reach. So what do you want to see in Brussels more? Is there anything that you're missing in here? I don't know, from the ice cream shop for Ukraine, or anything when it comes to leaders or environment.
Definitely some Ukrainian brands and services.
Shall we shout out any Ukrainian brand? What about the hoodies?
Actually, good. I should have come in one
next time.
So definitely I would like to see more Ukrainian businesses being present in Brussels, and I would like also to help if it's possible to do that. What do I want in Brussels? I think
sun.
Definitely.
That's ridiculous. Yes.
It's not. There is one thing I want to convey. I don't know if it really answers your question, but I just want it to be said out loud, that I think many people don't understand that this is not the war against Ukraine, or to get some parts of Ukrainian soil. This is the war against current world order and against democracy. So I wish more people could understand that and act appropriately, because this is not about us. This is about all of Europe, all of the civilized world. to be honest. If, this precedent of Ukraine being won over should not happen, to my opinion, because history showed that it wouldn't be good. So yeah, I wanted this message to be heard, and for me myself to try to do more for Ukraine from here, because I think being here it is important. I can do a lot of things being in Ukraine, volunteering, supporting, but I can as well do a lot of things from here. So yeah.
Wow, that's a good message, and I think that it's a very authentic thing to say, that it's not only you that's it's not Russia against Ukraine, indeed. Okay, well, my two last questions to each guest are always the same. What makes you happy? Is my first question of the last.
I think, well, honestly, seeing effects of my work, and like I mentioned, this testimony that a person that said that their life was changed. This is something that makes me happy, that touches my soul, if I may say, and understanding that even if I'm just one person in this world of billions of people, I can do something to change this world. A little bit, but I can.
What makes you hopeful? I think that kind of part of the second question is also that. Does it make you hopeful that you can change the world?
Yeah, and I think that the more people feel empowered to change the world and have this inner understanding that comes with, education and values that that we can pass on to future generations, that the more people feel empowered to change something, to make this world a better place to live and also to bring new lives in, this makes me hopeful.
Well, good. It makes me hopeful as well. Yeah. Well, it's been great to talk to you. It's been great to see you. And thank you very much for being so open and so honest. I'm sure that it was not easy to go in some of those topics. So I hope it's very useful for the people who are listening to hear that, because that's not something that you can hear on the news. And I think, again, as I said, it's an important perspective to hear how politics is affecting actual human life in like now, not as a testimonial 10 years later, or not as a perspective in some agenda, but like now, that's what happened to you, and that's what's happening back at home. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me here, and it was my pleasure.
Same. Well, our tea got cold, so yeah, and I was thinking too. So we have this shout out that I do every time. We have the board game Barabar, but we had such a deep conversation, and I felt very weird to say, well, pause, I have a board game to shout out. But now when you're pointing it out, I have a board game to shout out. Actually it's a human rights based game, so it's still in the topic of human rights, and it's created by a nice organization who's trying to raising awareness, but in a really fun way. So this is a game for saving the world. And the idea is that you face different challenges, from zombie attacks to giant spider attacks to global pandemic. And always I make jokes to them when I see Maria, who is the founder of Barabar, that some of those things are too realistic. So there is an energy crisis, there is drought, and there is a pandemic. And they created that before the pandemic and the energy crisis. So the idea is that you have different characters, you combine efforts with your team. It can be a team building activity or a family activity. You can be Emma Watson, you can be Frida Kahlo, or you can be Albert Einstein. You create a team and you fight the spiders, the zombies, or the drought. So order it at barabar.eu, and if you feel like it, shout out it to your friends and recommend it. to your company to do a nice team building activity with it. Whew. Okay, now it was a good time. Well, last but not least, I will have interesting guests the next episode as well. I'm not sure if it will be that interesting as Lyza was, but I will do my best. If you have any recommendations, comments, ideas, or ideas for guests, feel free to do so. You can subscribe to the channel. You can support us on Patreon, and by us, I mean me. Or you can just DM me if you have any very, very smart thoughts that you feel you need to share. Be good, be kind, hug your dog, and enjoy life. And Slava Ukraina.
Героям слава.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.